Ladies and gentlemen, sports fans alike, welcome to another edition of Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago. One of the couple, two, three best podcasts around. So sit back, grab yourself a cold one and a Polish sausage, park your keister in the front room, and listen to Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago.
In Chicago, you know that all sports rock. The Bears, Hawks, Bulls, Cubs, and Sox. Pick your favorite, you can choose. As long as the Packers lose. For everything you need to know, it's Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago. Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago. This is your host, Sean. On this episode, we have the Bears' first-round draft pick carted off practice in the first day. We have Jake Arrieta looking like not Jake Arrieta. And the White Sox have a new master tailor. All of this and more on this episode of Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago. But first, as always, I'd like to thank our sponsor, the Rockford Ice Hogs. If you're not familiar with the Rockford Ice Hogs, they're the AHL minor league affiliate of the Chicago Blackhawks. What does that mean for you? It means you get to see the stars of tomorrow today at family-friendly, fun, affordable prices. Only 90 minutes from the city limits. Check them out at icehogs.com. Tell them Swerski Sports sent you. Season tickets on sale now for the season, and you can get single game tickets starting soon for the October home opener. So check that out, icehogs.com. Well, welcome back, everybody. There was a hiatus last weekend, and I apologize about that. I was in San Diego for a few days for some R&R, well-deserved R&R, and I really planned to record when I got back, but there was the rainstorm and my flight was delayed and my work was demanding I did a bunch of things before Monday, so I ended up working until like 1 in the morning and then had to be at work at 7, so I just didn't record. And then I was trying to play catch up, and then it was Friday and I was like, oh, you know what, I'll just record the next episode, so I apologize about that. But on this episode we are going to have some Bears talk, some Cubs talk, and some White Sox talk. We're not really going to have any Bulls or Blackhawks for you this episode. I'm going to start off with, because we haven't talked too much about them, is we're going to start off with the Bears. We're going to move on to the White Sox. We'll do the White Sox first, and then we'll finish up the episode with the Chicago Cubs, and we'll call this one a day. So Chicago Bears training camp opened this week, and I want to have a quick little aside before we start talking about it. So in the Chicago Bears media department, they have what they call traditional media and non-traditional media. Traditional media is like the major news networks, plus ESPN, Comcast Sports, the sometimes the Tribune, etc. So the major established marketing outlet or media outlets. And then they have what they call non-traditional media, and that would be things like your fan-sided or any of like even the big Bears blogs, any sort of website media, any sort of podcasts or internet radio. They call that alternative media, which is fine. I don't care about the classifications. But last year I was invited. This show is officially recognized by the NFL as media, and we're recognized by the Chicago Bears as media. And last year they were very nice to allow me to come to training camp, and things were very nice. It was a nice time. And this year I reached back out to my contact, who apparently had left earlier in the spring and left the Chicago Bears organization. And I got a reply from his replacement, who told me that they hadn't decided what they were going to do yet for alternative media, which was a little frustrating because why wouldn't they just treat us like media? I get they don't want us to have it there every day, but just toss a few days out there for us to choose. That's what they did last year. Finally, they dragged their feet, and I get an email on Monday saying, we've decided we're going to open the training camp to you. You have the option of choosing one of 2 days. One was this past Friday, and the other one is this coming Monday. So 2 weekdays, a week, less than a week from the email I got letting me know. So it's the issue is that most people that do alternative media, they have a full-time job and they do this secondary. They're so taking a last-minute day off isn't necessarily going to work for everybody, myself included. So I wasn't able to take off the days to go to training camp, which was a little frustrating. And I know some other media outlets I talked to were equally as frustrated. So we're talking about the Chicago Bears. We're talking about them. We're keeping them in the news. This is a team that hasn't made the playoffs in a long time, and we're still keeping them front and center in our news outlets. So maybe they should keep that in mind, that we're the ones that keep them afloat here and talking about them and keeping them on everybody's mind. I mean, we have a dedicated and diehard fan base, but if the media coverage dries up, then fandom starts to wane too. So they should just keep that in mind. And even the traditional media has really criticized the Chicago Bears and the way they've handled the camp since John Fox has been in. Last year, they instituted you couldn't tweet from practice, you can't record anything from practice, you can't take pictures during practice except during designated picture times, which is basically when people are drinking water or jogging. It's almost the point that they don't want people there at all. My rant is over now, and that's, most of you probably don't care, but I just wanted you to be aware of what goes on, and you may hear people talk on ESPN radio or the Score or whatever. You may hear people, being disgruntled about that, but just think that that's the traditional media. Just imagine how the non-traditional media gets treated by the Chicago Bears. Not well. Anyway, so that's off my plate. We have a few news stories with the Bears. Nothing major yet. This is really just the first couple days of training camp. The first one I guess I want to talk about is the offensive line. I mean, this team is far from being an established, perfect, ready-to-go team. It really is. But is it a team that has enough talent to compete in the NFL for a playoff spot? Yes. Win the division? Probably not. Wild card? Probably. So this is not out of the realm of anything. But there are a lot of question marks. And I really trust that John Fox and Ryan Pace have worked really hard to fill in any sort of hole that they've had on this team. But Ryan Pace is a fairly honest dude, and he came forward the other day in a press conference and said that basically the gist of it was that he inherited a roster that was pretty much garbage, and it's going to take some more time to fully get to the point where he wants to be and have the talent level that he wants to have. And he couldn't fill all the holes in this short amount of time the way he would like to. Now, one of those spots is definitely a tight end position. Definitely tight end. And we'll touch on that in a second. But one of the other ones is the offensive line. And I know he's worked hard to plug the offensive line, but this is going to go forward as somewhat of a patchwork offensive line. You've got Kyle Long, who's arguably the best player on the team right now. And they're moving him back to right guard, his natural position, the position that he came in the league in, that he was a Pro Bowl at, moving him back to that position. And they're bringing back, you have Fronis Grasu returning at center, Charles Leno Jr. returning at left guard or left tackle, and Bobby Massey at your right tackle spot. And then you have the one position that's most up for grabs in the line is the left guard spot. And that's between draft pick Cody Whitehair and journeyman Ted Larson. Now, I know a lot of people, myself included, were really questioning the release of Matt Slauson because he was arguably one of the better offensive linemen over the past couple of years for the Chicago Bears, despite not having a Pro Bowl appearance. But when I sat down to prepare for this show, it sort of dawned on me the reason why. Matt Slauson is a little long in the tooth, and Matt Slauson might have been the best option for the Bears for this particular season, possibly. But going forward, is he the best option for the Bears? And the answer is no. He's an older guy. He's a great teammate. He had a very good career. He played great for the Chicago Bears. But he was an older guy, and Ryan Pace, his whole philosophy is to get younger and to get more athletic. And unlike the Bulls when they say that and they go out and get 102-year-old Dwayne Wade and try to sign Joakim Noah back, is the Bears are actually doing this. So if you consider that Cody Whitehair is very likely going to win that left guard spot, your starting offensive line could very well be Charles Leno, from left to right, Charles Leno, Cody Whitehair, Hronis Grasu, Kyle Long, and Bobby Massey. With Kyle Long being your oldest player on the offensive line at 27 years old. So it's Leno is 24, Whitehair's 24, Grasu's 24, Long's 27, and Massey's 26. That means you're going to have an entire offensive line under salary cap team control for several years going into their prime. And I think that is the vision that Ryan Pace had, was that it takes time to develop this offensive line. It takes time to mesh together. And it's not necessarily about having the best individual players. It's about having the best gelling offensive line that you can have. So if you put talented guys together and give them the time and the tools to grow, and you give years to grow, that by the time they think the Bears are ready to compete, which is next year, the year after, that this group has had 1, 2, 3 years to gel, ready to go, and really just, a nice unit. And that's the key right there. So for this year, though, I mean, next year, good to go. They all have another year under their belt. They've all worked together, et cetera, et cetera. But this is the year that I have the big question mark about, because honestly we've lost team leaders. Like this offense in general just doesn't have an identity per se. It doesn't have that leader. It doesn't have that guy. Kyle Long is that guy on the offense, and he's a guard. I'm not meaning to take away from the guard position, but it's not a position that you normally have your team leader. So looking at it this way is, I don't know what to expect out of the offensive line. It could be, we don't know what we're going to get out of Cody Whitehair. He's a very talented guy, and I like him coming out of K-State, but he's lacking a lot of elite strength, and that's going to be an issue. So there's a very good chance that Larson could get the start there. Hronis Grasu last year, center's one of the harder spots in the NFL to come in and start. Probably quarterback, wide receiver, center, right up there as hardest positions to be a rookie and jump right in and start. And Hronis Grasu came in, and some games looked good, some games looked bad. Sometimes it was up and down within a game itself. But the one consistent thing where he struggled was with big, strong guys. They just bowled him over. He couldn't hold his own. So Hronis Grasu basically had to spend the whole offseason building up a bigger ass and getting stronger. And I don't know. I haven't seen him because I couldn't get to training camp. Chicago Bears. So I don't know what we're going to get out of Hronis Grasu. It's going to be interesting to see and hear the reports coming out of training camp. But if Hronis Grasu can make that next leap, which I think he can because he's a talented guy, it's going to be so much better for the Bears. If the Bears have to solve a second position, maybe even a third position, left tackle, is that this is going to be a long year for the Bears. Barring any injury, I think the right side is fine. I think Bobby Massey and Kyle Long are going to be fine. It's going to be center, left guard, and left tackle that worries you. We talked last year over and over again how Charles Leno Jr. he played admirably. He played fine. But sometimes you want to get better production out of your left tackle than fine. He needed some help out there on occasions. Sometimes he looked good. Sometimes he didn't look so good. But he's far and away the best left tackle we have on this team. So I don't know where you go if he isn't able to make that next step or he gets injured. I really don't know where they go from there. Maybe Ted Larson plays left guard and you move Cody Whitehair to left tackle. Maybe Larson goes to right tackle and Kyle Long kicks out to right guard, and Ted Larson goes to right guard and Kyle Long kicks out to left tackle. I'm not sure. I don't know what the plan is. I'm sure they're planning for everybody to be healthy, but this is the NFL. So there's a big question mark for me at offensive line. And it's not that I worry that this is done and they're terrible. It's that it's a lot of question marks for me. And they need to go out. These guys need to go out and prove it and prove that they should be in the NFL playing these positions. And I'm a big believer. I know not everybody's big in this philosophy, but I'm a big believer that you build your team in the trenches. Defensive line, offensive line. And the Bears' offensive line, if they're going to struggle, this whole Bears offense is going to struggle, which means the Chicago Bears team is going to struggle. We have some question marks at defensive back. I mean, we've talked about this before. You can probably slot Kyle Fuller, Tracy Porter, and Adrian Amos as 3 starters. But who's going to be that nickel back? Who's going to be that other safety? I'm not sure. There's a lot of young talent there, but are any of them good enough to make your team better? The Bears spent a lot of money and a lot of time building up that front 7. They spent draft picks, several draft picks. You have an outside linebacker. You have a defensive end. You signed 2 free agent inside linebackers. You spent a lot of time, a lot of draft picks to build up that front 7. But the secondary is a big question mark. And I realize that the Bears defensive coordinator has a history of making average defensive backs look better and also using that front 7 to build pressure in order to mask the secondary. And both of those things are definitely legitimate. You could definitely do that. But what happens when those guys don't get pressure? You're really setting up your defensive backs to give up some big plays, I think. If you look at the stats from last year, I think the Bears defensive backs only had 6 interceptions on the whole season. And that's not good. That means that either the Bears are playing way too off, they're not being aggressive enough, or they're just not making the opportunities when they're there. And it's kind of a little bit of combination of all those things. So with that, the Bears went out and brought in Brandon Boykins. Brandon Boykin was a guy that was a really good slot corner for Pittsburgh Steelers a couple short years ago. He's still a young guy. He signed with Philadelphia, was cut by Philadelphia, was cut by Carolina, wasn't re-signed by the Steelers. I mean, he's just a couple of seasons. He's, 2 full seasons removed from a 6 interception year as a slot receiver or a slot corner. So what's going on? Now, this is all rumors. This is all hearsay. I don't know. I've never evaluated him as a physician, but Carnell Lake, the former defensive back for Pittsburgh Steelers, came out and said Brandon Boykins has a degenerative hip condition and he's got one leg longer than the other, and that it makes it so he can't run anymore. Now, stepping back a little bit, going, oh crap, what the hell did the Bears do signing him? But I mean, honestly, if he can't run, he can't play, the Bears just cut him. It's not a big deal. But if the guy shows he can play and he's saying his hips are fine and he can run fine, and if he can regain any of that form from 2013, the Bears just made a absolute steal pickup. I don't see it as a harm. Is you're going to cut half the people that you have on the roster. Is right now you're looking at like a 90-man roster. You're going to cut it down to 53, so almost half. So if you get rid of him, you get rid of him. He just throw the baby out with the bathwater and start again. But he's young enough where you're willing to take a chance on him, and you don't have enough talent where he's going to take away reps necessarily from somebody else. It's whoever's going to earn those reps. So I see it as a low risk, high reward type signing. But we'll see how that goes and where the Bears go with that. Keeping my fingers crossed, because I just think there's a lot of question marks in that Bears secondary. A couple more things with the Bears is they signed Willie Young to a 2-year extension, which is weird because the whole offseason everybody kept talking about the Bears were going to trade him, the Bears were going to cut him, he didn't have a role, he didn't fit the mold what the Bears are trying to do. And I was like, the guy was super productive. Once he fully recovered from his injury, he came out and just played well and plug and play. Same thing with Lamar Houston. They were 2 of the most productive Bears as far as pressures that they had. So I don't see why anybody's shocked by this, but it's great to see Willie Young get to earn that contract extension. Within the first hour of practice, and practice number 1 for Leonard Floyd, he gets carted off the field. And because of the rules, the NFL rules is they couldn't comment on what was wrong with him until after practice was over. So you have hours where the Chicago Bears fans are just sitting there agonizing, going, well, what the hell? What happened to Leonard Floyd? Why did he get carted off? And luckily, it just turned out he had some sort of stomach bug, and I don't know why they carted him off for that, but they did. And he's going to be fine. So it's just a stomach issue. But more scary is Kyle Long came up lame in the second practice with a calf injury. He came out, he hobbled a little bit, and he came out after lunch wearing a walking boot. Now, the saying, and what everyone's saying from the Bears organization is that it's just a precaution, and they have him in there, and he's probably going to miss a day, maybe 2 days, just precautionary because it's early on, and he's going to be fine. And I want to believe that, but with the whole Kevin White issue last year is you don't know what to believe until I see this guy out there on opening day, first game of the season playing. I'm going to be nervous. I'm a Chicago fan. It's what I do. And then the last thing I want to talk about with the Bears is we have Pernell McPhee, who is arguably the best defensive player we have on this team. And he's currently on the PUP list, the physically unable to perform, because he had off-season knee surgery. So what are we going to get out of him? Is he going to be able to play all 16 games? I guess nobody can guarantee any of that, but is he going to be ready to play opening the first game of the season. I don't know. I don't know what you're going to get out of him. He's probably going to miss most of training camp. And then what kind of condition is he going to be in? Is he going to have to, work on his fitness and his conditioning to get ready for games? I mean, if you hurt your shoulder, you can do some sort of cardio. You can do a lot of things to try to keep into shape. But when it's a knee injury, you can't run, you can't swim, you can't do any of these things. It's a big question mark. And I think that's really all I want to talk about the Bears. I planned to talk a little bit more about expectations and who I think will get the starting spots and predictions on the season, etc., etc. But I mean, really, we're like 2 practices in training camp so far. Because I can't go to training camp unless I go as a fan. I'm going to have to read some reports and just keep my ear to the ground and reach out to some of my contacts and see what we have. And I'll probably start doing some more next week and the week after, getting closer to that first preseason game. And then I think I promised you guys we would go to White Sox next. And I don't have a ton for the White Sox. Oh, you know what? I do have some Blackhawks news. I totally forgot about this. It's just a tiny bit. Really, we're not in training camp yet. It's a really quiet time of year for the NHL. But I want to talk to you just about one quick story. The Blackhawks general manager, Stan Bowman, said at the Blackhawks convention that he's pretty much prepared to enter the 2016-2017 season with the roster that he currently has constructed, which I think everybody took at face value because they really don't have a lot of money, and they've made the moves that they're going to make. So, all right, not a really crazy statement. I think everybody kind of agreed. But there's rumors out there that there could be one more addition coming, and it could be a really impactful addition. Coveted free agent Jimmy Vesey is going to hit the open market August 15th. And reportedly, the Blackhawks are one of the very, very few teams set to meet with him once he becomes eligible to speak to other clubs in 2 weeks. The quote from his agent, Peter Donatelli, is Chicago will be a team we want to talk to on August 15th. Chicago will be on that short list, but it shouldn't be read as they're ahead of anybody else. He really has no idea where he's going to be. It's going to be up to the teams to sell him. Yes, we have criteria, but we're interested in what the teams say rather than telling the teams what they have to say. Now, Vesey was a draft pick of the Nashville Predators, who drafted him the number 66 overall pick in the 2012 draft. And they traded him to Buffalo in June for a 2016 third-round draft pick when it became pretty much apparent that Nashville was not going to be able to hammer out a deal with him. So Buffalo was like, we'll take a flyer on the rights to exclusively negotiate with him. And they didn't go anywhere either. So basically on August 15th, he's going to be a free agent because he won't have agreed to his terms, and he's already completed his college play. What makes Vesey and Chicago a perfect match for each other is there's a legitimate spot in the top 6 to potentially play alongside Jonathan Taves. And because Vesey would be signing an entry-level contract, the maximum allowable salary is $925,000 per year, which completely benefits the Chicago Blackhawks. Vesey is a 2-time Hobey Baker Award finalist and captured the award as the best player in college hockey last season after scoring 24 goals and 22 assists in 33 games for Harvard, where he played 4 years. What's really great about this is this could be a real win-win situation for the Blackhawks. He's going to be signing an entry-level contract. So that means, like I just said, is that he has to sign for under $1 million, maximum $925,000. So the Blackhawks can fit that in there. He would be right up there with as easily as good as any of the other young players that the Blackhawks are going to be trying out for their big league club. And if he plays well and he plays like he did in his 4 years at Harvard, there's a legitimate spot or chance that he could be playing on that top line with Hossa and Taves. Now, if you have a kid who's in his entry-level contract and he gets to play his whole time with next to Jonathan Taves and Marian Hossa, that's going to make him look better. So when he becomes a free agent, he's going to be able to get a lot more money than he would playing next to, Joe Schmo and Timmy Tutall and whoever else. I mean, this is a big opportunity. And for the Blackhawks, it's an opportunity to get a young, talented player for cheap that fits into your salary cap structure. So hopefully the Blackhawks are able to do this. I mean, there are other teams that are absolutely going to try to sign him, but we'll see. We'll keep our eyes on it, and we'll keep reporting as we hear more news. So we are on to the White Sox now. I didn't get to report on this story last week, and I guess I'm glad I didn't, because it was just so stupid. So ridiculously stupid. Chris Sale was unhappy about wearing one of the throwback jerseys that had collars on them. So he took a knife while the rest of the team was out in batting practice and on the field. He went back in the locker room with a knife and cut up all of the jerseys so nobody would be able to wear them. Like a petulant child. Now, everybody else was just pretty much quick to kind of deflect and try to avoid the question. Except for Adam Eaton, who just came out, no, he's a competitor. He's got fire in him. He's a competitor. Blah. These two dopes, two dumb hillbillies. Chris Sale is extremely talented. I want to separate that out. But he's a dumb hillbilly. Adam Eaton's a dumb hillbilly. And these two are just dumb hillbillies together. And these are the same two dopes that were fired up about Adam LaRoche leaving the organization because they both said little, prepubescent Drake LaRoche was a team leader for them. Team leader for a bottom feeder team. Good for you. So Chris Sale cuts up. I just want to get this straight, Adam Eaton. I really want to get this straight. Is Drake LaRoche, 14-year-old Drake LaRoche, or I guess 13 at the time, 13-year-old Drake LaRoche was your team leader last year. And Chris Sale is a competitor because he went into the locker room when nobody was looking and cut up a bunch of jerseys, which got him suspended by his own team, and it forced one of your middle bullpen guys and Fat Albers to have to put in a spot start, which taxed your bullpen, and then you had to bring up a player from AAA to pitch against the Cubs, which ended up in a loss. So you taxed your bullpen and you cost your team wins. That is a competitor? You dippy hillbilly. That is stupidity. Call it out. It's fine if that's your friend. That's fine if you don't want to get rid of Chris Sale. You can condemn Chris Sale's behavior in that incident and still keep him on your team. You can separate those two things out. And I don't even want to get fired up about this. It's not so much the act, it's the people's behavior after the act. It was a stupid, silly thing that he did, and he should have just been man enough to walk in and be like, listen, that was really childish what I did. I accept my punishment. I apologize to my teammates. And I know it hurts us in the standings, but I can't go back and change time. I'm going to be better moving forward. Nope. He took his 5-game suspension. He came back in. He pitched a game against the Cubs where he didn't pitch very well. And afterwards, his teammates were asked, and he just like, no, he didn't say anything to us. And they asked Chris Sale, and he's like, I'll try to talk to him tomorrow maybe. So it was like a week before he talked to anybody, even if he has talked to anybody yet. Just grow up, Chris Sale. Grow up. Honestly, it's not the action you did, it's the actions afterwards and what you did after the action. Is man up, put your big boy pants on. Is sure you could throw a baseball, but you can't act like an adult. And then it's so frustrating. And I feel bad for your teammates, and I feel bad for the White Sox fans because they don't deserve to have a big hillbilly baby on their team that when they're fighting for a wild card spot and you're doing dumb stuff like this. Which brings us to the point is, if you're the White Sox organization, is what do you do with Chris Sale? Honestly, what do you do with him? Trade deadline is Monday at 3 in the afternoon. So we've got, we're counting down hours until the end of the trade deadline, and Chris Sale's name keeps popping up. And the White Sox are apparently asking for basically the world to get Chris Sale, and rightfully so. They didn't, after this incident or after his bad last start, they didn't lower his price at all because he's a legitimate ace. He's a guy that I believe was in the top 6 in Cy Young voting each of the last 5 years. So he's a legitimate ace, and he's under ridiculous team salary cap control for the next several years. So you should be able to just plunder somebody's minor league system, plus get a few young major league prospects or major league players to get a Chris Sale. It's going to be is some team is going to have to put together a ridiculous package and have that need for another starter for their playoff run, and we'll see where that goes. But if you're the White Soxes, if you don't need to trade him, don't trade him, or hold off to the offseason. You'll get better and more in the offseason than you will at the trade deadline. So that's that. Let's see. Since we last did a show, the White Sox lost 2 out of 3 to the Mariners. They split 2 out of 4 with the Tigers, and split the Subway Series with the Cubs 2 out of 2 or 2 out of 4, and they lost the first game of the 3-game series to the Twins. And then they've got 2 more against the Twins. We're playing right now. They got 3 against the Tigers, 3 against the Orioles. This is this team needs to figure out what they are, who they are. Like I said, trade deadline is Monday. Are they going to be buyers? Are they going to be sellers? Are they just going to hold pat? I mean, it's tough. They're behind several teams. I mean, they're not that many games out of the wild card, but there's a lot of teams in between. And sometimes it's almost better to be more games behind one team than less games but have a bunch of teams in between, because it's hard in baseball. There's so many games. It's hard to catch up to multiple teams, because it's not like football where 1 week you can gain a whole game on everybody. This is baseball. They might play 6 games in this or 7 games in this week, and if they one team ahead of you goes 4-2, it's hard. It's hard to go 5-1 or 6-0. It's hard to do that. So you don't gain any room in a week, or you gain 1 game and one team. And if you're all playing each other, you might win a game here, but this team loses to this team, and if 2 teams ahead of you play each other, you're not gaining any ground on one of them. So it's a hard spot to be in, to be behind multiple teams, and it's much more of a daunting task to catch up and pass several teams than it is to catch up to one team that's really far behind you. I mean, look at the Cardinals. They're tracking to catch up to the Cubs, and they have for the most part. I mean, the Cubs were like 12 games or 13 games up on them, and now they're like, 6 games or something, 6.5. So they're catching right up. It's a lot easier to do with one team, because you're going to play that team. If you sweep them, you gain 2, 3, 4 games right there, and then you can catch up game a week. It's not so bad. But when you have multiple teams ahead of you, you're basically asking for a lot of teams to come back to reality at the same time. A lot harder to do. So the White Sox basically have to, by Monday decide what are we? Are we a team that's fighting for a wild card spot, fighting for the playoffs? Or are we a team we've just hit a plateau, we can't be any better than this, and we might as well build for the future and actually do a full rebuild and not a partial rebuild, partial duct tape everything together type of thing that they've been doing? Or they hold pat and just regroup next year with the same team. It's a big question that the White Sox brass have to figure out. If you're looking and you've got pluses and minuses there. Is Chris Sale is one of the best pitchers in baseball. Might win a Cy Young this year. Who knows? It's a wide open game. And then in your past 30 days, you've had Quintana and Shields have been absolutely great. Quintana has a 2.1 ERA and Shields has a 1.77 ERA. I mean, if you feel like you want to just kind of hold tight and go on next year, is if you could decide to trade James Shields and get more in return than what you paid for him, or you can bring him back next year and have your whole rotation ready to go with under $40 million for the season, which is just absolutely incredible. What else? I didn't mention that the Cubs or the White Sox brought Carson Fulmer up from the minors, and he is basically being given the Chris Sale treatment, where they're starting him off in the bullpen and letting him pitch that way, and then eventually going to move to the starting role, which I think is a pretty good option for him. Is you get to take a peek at some batters. You're not going to cost the team too much. You can be pulled out easily. Whereas if you're a starter and you have a rough time and you get pulled out, you're really taxing the bullpen. If you're in the bullpen and you come in and pitch to 2-3 guys and you don't do well, it's not a big deal to pull you out. It's much less taxing on the bullpen. So I think it's a smart way to go. It builds up his confidence. It lets him see major league hitters. And I think it's the smart way to go, and it worked really well for Chris Sale. And I guess the last thing I want to talk about the White Sox is yesterday's game against the Twins. They had another fantastic pitching performance. It was an absolute gem by Quintana. He went 6 2/3 innings, gave up 1 run, 9 strikeouts, and then the bullpen even came in and had great games. Fat Albers pitched 1 1/3 innings with 1 hit, no runs. Duke came in and looked great, an inning, no hits. Jones, inning, no hits. Robertson came in, 1 inning, got a strikeout. And the White Sox just couldn't score any runs. They had a leadoff home run by Adam Eaton, which they took a 1-0 lead, and nothing after that. Tim Anderson goes 0 for 5. He's batting .264 on the season, so he goes 0 for 5. Melky Cabrera goes 2 for 5, but there's nobody on base for him to knock in any runs. And Abreu goes 1 for 5. Abreu's .272 on the season, not hitting for crap really. Justin Morneau comes in, is 1 for 3, but Avi Garcia is put in as a pinch hitter, DH, and he goes 0 for 2. Get nothing from your catching spot. JB Shuck goes 0 for 3. Saladino goes 0 for 4. Sanchez goes 0 for 4. I mean, you got in 12 innings, you get 6 hits. 12 innings, you get 6 hits, and you got 1 walk. 1 walk. You can't do that. You can't do that, especially against the Twins. The Twins they're not a good team. They're 39 63 at this point. They're like 20 some games under 500. You've got to, if you have any hopes of making the postseason, you need to be beating these teams. That's really all I have to say about the White Sox. Is they're such a frustrating team to watch. Is they just can't seem to put it all together, and Robin Ventura has just got to be. That sucks to get fired. It's got to be a big relief for him because this has got to be just a really frustrating spot for him. And then lastly, we'll move on to the Chicago Cubs. Since we talked, the Cubs came out and won the series against Milwaukee. Took 2 out of 3. They took 2 out of 3 against the Mets, which was really a nice spot. And I know the Mets have gone in a tailspin basically since that series, but it doesn't matter. You beat the Mets, you beat the Mets. And then they split that series with the White Sox. But the elephant in the room that we basically have to address is the trade for Aroldis Chapman. On one hand, he's basically a shutdown lefty closer that throws 105 miles an hour. On the other hand, and so not only is he a shutdown left-handed closer that throws 105 miles an hour, but you had a pretty good closer in Rondon. Now Rondon becomes the setup man, pitches the 8th, and so you shut down the 8th and the 9th basically most nights. Then you move Strop to the 7th. So basically, after your starter comes out, if he pitches 6 innings, you go Strop, Rondon, and Chapman, and you shut down 7, 8, and 9. This should really be helpful for the Cubs come the playoffs. If you get a lead early, you have good starting pitching, and then these 3 come in and just shut the door on a team. Just think about when the Yankees had Mariano Rivera. Is if you didn't score early, you lost the game because you were not going to score on Mariano Rivera. But then, on the other hand, is Aroldis Chapman's a real pile of shit. Pardon my language if there's kids listening, but he is. He's a real pile of crap that has domestic battery charges on his wife and shot up their garage with a gun and intimidated her with a gun. Like, that's not what a good person does. And the Cubs brass came out and was like, hey, listen, we talked to him. We did our due diligence. We talked to the league. We talked to his teammates. We talked to everybody. And we talked to him, and he knows what's expected of him. And everything's great. And as fans, we're like, all right, well, we trust Jed and Theo and Tom Ricketts. And I'm sure they went through all of this. And what does Aroldis Chapman have to say after this? I don't know. I was sleepy. I don't remember any of this. What? You were sleepy? You were sleepy. So you don't remember any of this conversation. And you don't remember what the Cubs expect of you as a citizen on this really great team. This Cubs team is even if you don't like the Cubs, they're a bunch of good dudes. You have Rizzo, who's a good guy. Chris Bryant's a good guy. Addison Russell, good. It's just a team of really good dudes. It's a likable bunch of people. David Ross, Jake Arrieta. Other than John Lackey, for the most part, it's a bunch of likable dudes. Now you add Aroldis Chapman in there, and it sort of changes the dynamics. There's definitely going to be people that no longer root for the Cubs or have a really hard time with the Cubs organization winning because of Aroldis Chapman, and I don't necessarily blame them. I don't know if I'm going to take that road, and I read about a group of people who every time Aroldis Chapman comes into the game for the Cubs, is they're going to make a donation to women, to an organization that supports battered women, and I think that's a really great idea. Because nobody, it's really hard. I mean, I've been a Cubs fan since before Aroldis Chapman was born. And I'm going to be a Cubs fan long after he's retired. So it's really hard to have one person dictate how I root for my team. And it's a really tough predicament. And I think that is a very good compromise. It makes me feel like I acknowledge that there is an issue here, and I don't like him as a person, but still want my team to win. And I'm going to put on the website an organization, and if this is something that is interesting to you, feel free to reach out to me or go right to the organization. And every time Aroldis Chapman comes into a game, I'm going to donate some money. So hopefully that does some good. Now let's look at the Cubs pitching a little bit over the last 30 days, basically just before the All-Star break. And it's really been a tale of, two different pitchers here. I'm going to go in rotation order. Is in the last 30 days, and this is not including today's game, which if you do, Jake Arrieta before today's game was 0-2 in his last 30 days with a 5.55 ERA, 24 strikeouts, 6 walks, and a 1.36 whip. Now that's not good. And yet in today, he pitched all right. He gave up 2 runs in 7 innings, got the loss. But people are getting contact on Jake Arrieta. I don't think he's lost any velocity. So what's happening to him? I think it's just he's not on a lot of his pitches. He's not getting the precision and the pinpoint accuracy that he's had over that historic run. And what this basically says is Jake Arrieta is still a pretty good pitcher, but he's not the guy that he was for that year stretch where he was basically unhittable. He's not Bob Gibson. He's not Sandy Koufax. He's still a good pitcher, and you can still win with him being in your rotation, but he is not the absolute ace that you thought he was. So what can you expect from him going forward? I fully expect him to be better than he has been in this stretch, but because in the first third of the season, he was really good. He continued on what he was doing, and then he's had some real dips in there, and I don't know what's causing the, this, I don't know, lack of accuracy and loss of precision, but he's pitched when he got the break for the All-Star game and he came back, he pitched much better. So hopefully it's just needs rest, or he's just a little bit of fatigue, and they give him the rest he needs and he comes back, because they're going to need him to pitch really well in the playoffs. They're going to need him to pitch well. And then you have in the last 30 days, not including yesterday's game, because I got all these stats yesterday morning, so it was before the game. Lester was 1-1 with a 10.13 ERA in the last 30 days, 24 strikeouts, 6 walks, and a 1.36 whip. That's not good either. I mean, he was a guy that was arguably could have been in Cy Young conversation. He just was pitching really well, and then just this past month just hasn't looked very good. Just hasn't looked good at all. And I don't know how to explain it. And it started to be something that was very worrisome. But then yesterday's game, he pitched for the most part pretty well. In early couple innings, he had some runners in scoring position, but he fought them off and was able to keep them off the scoreboard. And pulling up the stats for that game as we're speaking, what was his line for the game? Is he pitched 6 innings, gave up 4 hits, 2 walks, 7 strikeouts, no runs. Montgomery was the other new bullpen arm that the Cubs picked up. He was the only one that gave up a run. It was a run he gave up 1 run in 2 innings. He did pitched the last 2 innings. So Lester had a really great game and seems to bounce back, which bodes well for the Cubs. In that same stretch, 30 days, is John Lackey is 1-3 with a 4.7 ERA, 35 strikeouts, 14 walks, and a 1.23 whip. But then his last start, he looked pretty good too against the White Sox. So hopefully it's just bouncing back, and the Cubs basically as a whole were in a funk, and they're coming out of it. But the two guys that have been fantastic over the last 30 days and really helped keep the Cubs ship afloat, Jason Hamill, 3-1. The ERA is not great, but that was pretty much due to, that 10 or 8 runs or 10 runs or whatever he gave against the Mets. It was that one awful game. But other than that, is 3-1, 27 strikeouts, 8 walks, and a 1.19 whip. And Kyle Hendricks, in his last 30 days, 4-1 with a 1.41 ERA, 25 strikeouts, 9 walks, and a 1.16 whip. So Hendricks has been really good, and for the most part, Hamill's been really good. And quickly just looking at in that same time period, the bullpen is Stropey has a 1.93 ERA with a 0.64 whip. Rondon has a 0.88 whip. C.J. Edwards has quietly come from the Cubs minor league system and has pitched very well for himself. And he's got a 0.82 whip. And Travis Wood has struggled a little bit with his 1.5 whip and 5.19 ERA. So, the Cubs bullpen is turning it back up a little bit. And like I said, backtracking a little bit, is Hamill had that just absolute implosion. It was the July 1st game against the Mets. But Hamill, his last 3 games, barring that awful game against the Mets, his last 3 games, he had the win, 7 innings pitched, 1 earned run against the White Sox, 5 innings pitched, 2 earned runs against Milwaukee, and 6 innings pitched with 1 earned run against Texas, all 3 wins. Pretty darn good. And Lester, tale of 2 pitchers. He had a loss versus the Mets, and he pitched 1 1/3 innings, gave up 8 earned runs, and then had a no decision versus Pittsburgh, where he had 3 innings pitched, gave up 5 earned runs. But then he had the win against the Mets the next time he pitched against, 7 2/3 innings with 1 earned run. He had the no decision where he had 4 innings pitched, 4 earned runs against Milwaukee. And then he comes back out with 6 innings pitched with no earned runs against Seattle. So he's just really been up and down over this past month. Same thing with Arrieta. Is he had the loss to the Mets, 5 1/3 innings pitched, 4 earned runs. Another loss to Pittsburgh where he had 6 earned runs in 6 innings. But then he had the absolute pitcher's duel with Noah Syndergaard against the Mets, and he got the no decision. But he pitched 7 innings with only 1 run. But then he pitched terrible against a really light hitting White Sox team. Gave up 4 runs in 5 innings. So it's those two guys have really got to be more consistent and really have to pick it up, because you can't rely on Hamill and Hendricks to be your aces. And your offense is pretty much being carried right now by Baez, Bryant, Rizzo, and Russell. Prior to the last 2 games, so as of Friday morning, in the last 30 days, those 4 guys have a combined 20 home runs and 63 RBIs. So they're really knocking the cover off the ball, and the Cubs offense continued Friday night and then struggled today against Seattle. And then wrapping up the Cubs is, they have Soler, who's doing some rehab starts right now and is going to be returning to this team. And Chris Coughlin just returned. So you have a little bit of a question mark of what you're going to do if you're the Cubs. You can't do any. You can't send Coughlin down to the minors because he's out of options, and you can't send Caesar down to the minors because he's out of options. So it's going to be La Stella probably going down. And then when Soler comes back, you got to figure something else out, because he's definitely going to come back to the big league roster. So honestly, this is going to be a tough decision for Jed Theo and the Cubs brass of what they're going to do, and Joe Madden, because especially if the rumors are true that the Cubs are looking to bring in another outfielder, this is going to be, you're going to have to get rid of a guy that Joe Madden wants on this team until September call-ups, and you can expand the roster. But for that next month or so, you're going to be really struggling of, who's going to get the at-bats, who's going to be on the roster, who's going to get sent down to Iowa. And the last 2 points I want to hit on are, one, what's wrong with Jason Hayward? I really, truly, 100% wanted to believe that he's a slow starter and he was going to get better. Statistics showed he starts really slow, and he started right on that pace that he starts, but he starts to heat up as the year goes on, and he just really hasn't. He's shown flashes of it. Like Friday, I was listening to the game. I was at work driving around, and he caught a good one against a very good pitcher and knocked it out of the park. And you're like, all right, well, this is going to turn it around. This is going to be what where we see the Cubs and we see Jason Hayward. He's going to get better at this point. But then he comes back and he just bottoms out after that. He comes back after the nice home run and nice game against Seattle, and he ends up with a 1 for 3, bringing his batting average up to a 230. It's tough on the team because when you move, he's most comfortable in that second spot, batting in the second spot, but it really sputters your offense if you put him in the second spot. And then if he bats towards the bottom, he's just not getting people can bat or pitch around him a little bit. So it's a tough spot. It's tough to deal with as the Cubs manager, Joe Madden. It's a tough decision for him because he's arguably the best fielding right fielder in baseball, and he's made so many great plays for this team and saved so many runs with his arm and his glove that you can't really take him out. But his batting hasn't been great. So it's a tough one, and Fowler hasn't been doing that great since he's come back from the injury, but apparently he's still nursing a little bit of the nagging injury as far as he's still not at 100%. So, but the Cubs need to put him in there because he's the cog that drives this engine for the Cubs offense. So we'll see. And I guess the last thing I want to say is, from now until the next episode, is the Cubs will have one more in the homestand against the Mariners. Then the Marlins come to town for 3. And then the Cubs go to Oakland for 3 more. And that'll wrap up this coming week. So thank you guys so much for listening. If you have any questions or comments, or you want to hear yourself on the air, reach out to us in any of the fashions that we have. So if you're on Twitter, Twitter at Swerski Sports, Facebook.com/Swerski Sports. The website is SwerskiSports.com. Any of those ways, feel free to reach out to us. And please make sure you're subscribing. However you're listening, iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, it's free. But the more subscribers, it means comes to your inbox as soon as I finish recording, and you don't have to go searching around for it. And make sure you share this with your friends as well. And thank you guys so much for listening. Until next time, bear down.
Cubs win! What a lucky break! The good Lord wants the Cubs to win!
We thank Ditka and God for all they have provided.
Cubs win! Cubs win! Cubs win!
Oh, I don't want her, you can have her, she's a Packer fan. She can't fit in my van.
And she looks like number New Yorkers. Smoking crack is not legal on planes. Bears 31 to -7. The Bears!
Oh, when the Bears go bearing down.